Alright guys, today I'm going to be walking you through my enemy armor damage tank build using 3-piece striker and 3-piece predator's mark. The build functions by using lower firearms and very high stamina to achieve extremely high toughness numbers, but still unlocks a tremendous amount of DPS potential through the use of enemy armor damage and specific gun talents in specific slots. I'll start with my gear and then move on to my weapons, talents, skills, etc. Starting off with, we have this striker's harness. Now for the stat points on this piece of gear, you want as high a stamina roll as possible. You want health and armor as the major attributes, as that is the primary way to increase toughness even further. And then you want ammo capacity as a minor attribute. And it's important to note before going any further that the composition of the build is actually 4 pieces of stamina, 1 piece of firearms. And that leads you to have lower firearms in the current metagame Alpha Bridge build. However, you can perform just as many role responsibilities of the DPS class with this build as in Alpha Bridge due to the fact that you have certain talents and you don't need 4790 firearms to unlock them. This allows you to have much higher toughness than many other builds while still having just as much damage. Moving on to the backpack, it is fairly straightforward. You want armor as a major attribute, ammo capacity as a minor attribute, and this is my 1 piece of firearms gear, so I want as high a main stat firearms roll as possible. Now again, before going any further, there's one more thing that we need to note, and that is you should always be looking at the base armor values on your gear. Before re-rolling the major attribute to armor, you want to have as high a major armor roll as possible. This is something that cannot be re-rolled, and you can only roll it once. When you acquire the gear, it has that base armor roll, and it's important to look for an extra 100 or 150 over many other items before choosing an item to run in the build. Next up, we have our Striker's Mask. Now, this is our 3rd piece of Striker's gear before we get into the 3 pieces of Predator's Mark gear, which allows us to unlock the 3-piece bonus of 10% enemy armor damage. That is core and critical to the build. You're stacking this as high as possible. The 2-piece bonus of 20% stability helps tremendously on console with assault rifles, especially ones with high recoil, so this build will perform extremely well with an M4 or an LVOAC, though I'm not using one right now. I'll discuss that later. But the main component is the 10% enemy armor damage on the 3-piece bonus. Now, for the mask, you want as high a stamina roll as possible, or whatever main stat you're choosing to go with. Since I do have a composition of 4 to 1 in terms of stamina to firearms, that's what I have opted for. And then for major attributes, I would prefer health. That should be re-rolled to health to increase the toughness even further. This build is not completely min-max, though it is darn close. And for a minor attribute, you want enemy armor damage, absolutely. That's just going to further increase the amount of damage that you're dealing, even though you're not speccing into firearms, or essentially building a DPS class. Moving on to our Predator's Mark pieces, we'll start off with our gloves. Now, on my gloves, I have opted to run with a high stamina roll, 4% health on kill, 1189 assault rifle damage, and 15% critical hit damage. I would prefer to have, instead of health on kill, critical hit chance. That would further increase my DPS, but health on kill does not hinder the build at all. Next up, we have our Predator's Mark knee pads, and these are a fairly straightforward item in most builds. You want as high a main stat, again, as possible. For a major attribute, you always want armor. I could do for a little bit of a higher roll there. Again, there's a little bit of further min-maxing that you can do if you are building this from your end. And then for minor attributes, you want as high enemy armor damage as possible. 12% is a fantastic roll there. This tacks on top of everything else that you're running to create absurdly high numbers in the EAD category, which makes the build cross-perform in PvE and PvP alike, but I'll talk about that more when I go over my character sheet. Last up, we have our Predator's Mark holster. Now, this is an extremely straightforward item in any build. You want as high a main stat as possible in all 3 categories, and then armor as a major attribute. Since I have rolled over 1250 in all 3 categories, I would consider this a god roll, and it is my 3rd piece of Predator's Mark gear, which allows me to unlock the 3-piece bonus of 8% assault rifle damage. Now, this is integral to the build, allows us to spec primarily into stamina while still increasing DPS without going into firearms. Moving on, I have opted to run a black market AK-74 for a variety of reasons. Number 1, this roll in particular has very high enemy armor damage, which feeds into the whole composition of the build. Second, it has very high base damage, which means it scales even better with the 8% from the 3-piece Predator's Mark bonus. And third, and the most important reason, is unforgiving, destructive, and responsive are the talents. But outside of that, responsive is actually in the 3rd slot. Now, responsive primarily and normally requires 4790 firearms to unlock, which means I would have to spec 1 more piece of stamina gear into firearms in order to proc that talent and have it active. And since most PvP encounters do take place within 10 meters, it's going to be almost an unconditional guaranteed 10% increased damage to enemy agents. Since it is in the 3rd talent and is free, I am free to then use all of my points outside of firearms to put into stamina. I can actually spec significantly lower into firearms than I would normally in any other build, still maintain the high damage, still maintain the percentage weapon damage increases of responsive as well as unforgiving, and then spec all the rest into stamina to achieve these extremely high toughness numbers. Now, destructive also pairs very well with the whole concept of enemy armor damage. It does cross-perform in PvP and PvE, and it's just another good talent to run with the build. However, you can switch this out for something else as long as it doesn't require 4790 firearms to unlock, as long as it's a primarily stamina gun talent. For gear mods, it's extremely straightforward. All you want is stamina with armor in every single mod slot. And then for weapon mods, it's also extremely straightforward. However, I'll go over it for anyone wondering. You want mag size on the magazine. The secondary attributes don't matter as much, though RPM and reload speed are quite good. You want critical hit damage on your underbarrel. You could also go with reload speed if you wanted to. You want headshot damage on your suppressor. You want critical hit chance as a secondary attribute, as well as crit hit damage if you can get it. And then you want headshot damage on your upper scope, on your optic, or you want critical hit chance if you can't get that. As long as you have both in the minor and major attribute slot, it's going to be the best in slot for increasing DPS overall. Since I have extremely low electronics and skill power, every single one of my performance mods is first aid self-heal, and this gives us a nice segue into the skills and why we're running them. The primary is going to be booster shot on your first aid self-heal. This is going to allow you to increase your mitigation and increase your damage, which also allows you to bypass the fact that you have less firearms and less base damage than most other builds, but through a variety of other mechanics such as booster shot, you're increasing that and competing while having extremely high toughness. And then you also want pulse with scrambler. This is a must-have in the DZ, especially if you're solo, but also in a group because it conceals you from enemy pulses, negates them, and also has the ability to actually stay pulsed on enemy targets if they don't conceal themselves, increase your critical hit chance and your crit hit damage, which further increases DPS. For your talents, if you are in a group, you want combat medic, you want critical save. That is an essential one to any build out there. Crit save right now is probably the most important player talent. Again, if you are in a group, you want triage. That's going to be a primary tool for decreasing cooldowns and popping booster shot more often. And then you want on the move. This is, again, essential for any DPS style build where you are getting the killing blow on targets. But as soon as you switch over and transition to a actually solo style of gameplay where you do not have teammates, you don't have a squad with you, you're going to switch out one is none and strike back for combat medic and triage. So here we are in the Dark Zone, and I will be flagging Rogue for these demonstrations. My primary activity that I participate in is PvP, even though it's in a really bad state right now, so that's kind of what I equate all my builds to, and that's how I demonstrate them. But it is assured that this build will cross-perform in PvE to an extremely high caliber. I am going to be using grenades a lot of people are. The PvP is in a really bad spot, like I said, a lot of hip firing and running in circles. But since you have such high toughness, you're going to be able to sustain a lot of that damage. A lot of players can't land every single shot that they have. They honestly spray and pray. They, wiggle their reticle all around the screen, firing a lot of different bullets, and they eventually drop you because they do have high damage. However, since your toughness is so sky high, you're going to be able to sustain that, as well as proc critical save at will, and reliably operate within the last health segment or the last two to proc some, if not all, of the unforgiving bonus. Now, when you are finally aiming down sights and dealing damage to players, you do a lot of raw weapon DPS. It's extremely powerful, and that is because your enemy armor damage is so high that you're stripping away the majority of what they have, probably on about 53 to 56% weapon mitigation built right into their gear. Since they probably have armor on all their major attributes and armor on all their different gear mods, they're sitting somewhere in that sweet spot, and 68% EAD, enemy armor damage, is going to negate a large portion of that. So it's very, very powerful against enemy agents, and it's my go-to now if my squad needs a tank DPS. I can survive a lot longer, I can provide a lot more utility. Sometimes I will go down too soon in squad engagements, and that's not fun for anyone. So if I put this build on, I know that I have a security blanket. I'm extremely tanky before any mitigation bonuses. I can pop booster shot, I can get crit save, I can get on the move, and I can easily achieve much higher mitigation numbers and toughness numbers than the standard DPS cookie cutter build that's out there in the DZ right now. It's something that does have a lot of damage when you finally do aim down sights due to unforgiving, as I already stated. Since you are probably always within the responsive radius, within 10 meters, you're going to have that plus booster shot plus unforgiving. You can pop consumables if you want to, and you'll be able to outtrade them. A lot of situations, players are going to aim down sights thinking that they have the end-all DPS build and that you're not going to be able to beat them. But since you have such high toughness, you oftentimes are going to be able to beat them and reliably operate in that last health segment, which they aren't prepared prepared for. And since the black market AK-74 has such high base damage to begin with, everything scales on top of that very, very well. It's a fun build. It's something that I'm really excited to have put together. I used it on the live stream for a while, and everybody was really happy with it, and everybody requested that I make the build video for it, so here it is. Again, this does cross-perform. If you want to use this in PvE, if you want to be solo or in a group, it's going to have value in all those situations. It's going to keep you alive for a lot longer. A lot of players are looking for alternatives to the metagame right now, and that's what our channel is going to continue to seek to provide. So thank you for dropping by. And as always, guys, if you want to support the channel, if you want to support what Upper Echelon is doing, please check out the links below. We appreciate all the support and the viewership. And as always, guys, have a nice night.